Welcome everyone. Thank you for your time. We appreciate you being a part of this interview today. My name is Syeda Kissa Zehra and I'm the Senior Research Associate at SARIM. Today we have an amazing speaker, Arif Hussain. He is well-known community organizer and researcher. Arif works with progressive organizations in India that are in the forefront of workers and farmers movement for upbringing the society, as well as supporting anti-casteism and anti-racism over a decade. So please welcome him. How are you?
Thank you very much. I'm good, thank you. And thanks very much for having me. And I'm really looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much. Great. Now, without further ado, we will turn to our very first question. That is, please introduce yourself briefly to us. What motivated you to get involved in this struggle against racism and casteism?
Uh, yeah, so I mean, I would say that my kind of initiation has been other way around. That I came from anti-casteism work to anti-racism work. I grew up in a state called Bihar in the eastern part of India, and during the 90s, and that's also the time when this movement of social justice was coming of age. I mean, the movement is not new in India, going on since independence, but it really reached a very powerful phase in the 60s and the 70s, and then finally the establishment kind of started. Not just taking note of it, but the force of the movement was strong. So I kind of got initiated and just being aware of what's going around and awareness around caste. And once I was in college, I realized that, okay, I come from this Pasmanda Muslim caste. And then I further started exploring further, what does it all mean? And then what are the basis of discrimination? Though I had the privilege of like a middle class family, my father was is professional, so and living in an urban area, and especially in that time where the people who were either too downtrodden or of dominant or oppressed caste were expressing themselves. So that was kind of thing. But when you look at other parts of India where the movement was not so strong, you see the difference, and that kind of creates an awareness. Then about 10 years ago, I moved to US to study and to work. And living in this area, living in the US, I mean, not that I was not aware of racism and the issues around race and what it is, but then you really see it, not just like racism against me, but broadly speaking against mostly the African American population and the Latino population. I mean, anybody who's not white, basically. And then you start also kind of exploring it in terms of its institutional aspects of it. And then uh, as a kind of an aware, interested person who wants to connect to community, you see that this is an issue which is at the core of many things which we see around. Like, for example, we talk about how slavery is over and stuff like that, but we look at the carceral state. I mean, why, in terms of percentages, the US has the highest percentage of its population in prisons. And now, if you look at prisons, then you see that most of the black people. And what are they doing there? They're doing like they're like almost slave rate labor and stuff like that. So, and having that kind of foundation of awareness of a social stratification, kind of it you have sort of a framework, and then it kind of fits in that, okay, this is another system of social stratification which is common here. Okay, and this is how the society works. And as you become more involved in community activity,
The marginalized Muslims in India. In other words, how does the casteism and caste discrimination plays out the Pasmanda Muslims?
okay, it's a very long and kind of complex question. Let me just think.
Yes.
So first of all, when we start talking about caste as being religion is specific, for this religion or that religion, before that we need to sort of think and settle the question whether caste is a religious institution. In that case, it will be religion specific, or it's a social institution. Okay, that it is not limited to a religion or a religious group, but it is prevalent in the society where it is, and in the society you have very different sects, different religions and stuff like that. At least in South Asia, when we look at caste, it looks like it's a social institution, and not just looks like social institution. There are tons of studies, and the if you talk about studies, the book reality, or you talk about the field reality, both the realities indicate that caste is a social institution. So I think it's not the right approach to kind of claim caste as like specific to one religious group or other religious group. It is common across religious groups in South Asia, and though as it's a system of social stratification, so not everybody, not every caste suffers or kind of is disadvantaged by it by the same sort of intensity, so to speak. Okay, if there is within that there is a stratification. Like if even if you say like when we say pasmanda, pasmanda is a it's a big term. Basically, it includes all tribal Muslims, all what in India we call OBC Muslims, which are basically working class, working people, artisans, farmers, Muslims, and of course the Dalit Muslims who are not actually considered. And within that also there are many castes. Like within, even if you call Dalit Muslims who are not really recognized as Dalits, there are many castes. Within the Shudras, there are many castes. And within tribal groups also, there is, depending upon which part of India we're talking about, there is variation. So that we need to be very cognizant of. And sorry, what was the second part of your question? It was a very long question.
Yeah, so the second, in other words, how does the casteism and caste discrimination plays out for the Pasmanda Muslim? This is the second one.
Oh yeah, so yes, I was getting there. So as I said earlier, that Pasmanda Muslim basically is a very broad term. It covers almost I would say 85 to 90% of Indian Muslims. Because apart from the Ashraf Muslims who claim their lineage from the Prophet and who claim that they came from outside, everybody is a Pasmanda Muslim. So for different groups, it operates differently. Now, very interestingly, we know, and there is we'll talk about it later, about Dalit Muslims, or considering Dalit Muslims, or adding them in the scheduled caste list and giving them the protections under it. The tribal Muslims, the tribals who converted to Islam, actually have that protection. And the tribals who converted to Islam, just as the tribals who converted to Hinduism and Brahminism, whatever you call them, or who converted to Christianity, all of them have protections and the affirmative action policies which are under the constitution. They get it. Okay. Now, which is a very small number in terms of tribal Muslims. They're mostly in the western and southern part of India. Now, coming to the Dalit Muslim. Now, when I say Dalit Muslims, they are not categorized as Dalit as per, I mean, Dalit is a term coined by Dr. Ambedkar, but the constitutional term is scheduled caste. So they are actually not considered a scheduled caste, even though they are exact parallels of people who are of other religions. So, for example, if a Dalit Sikh, what they're doing, like if it's a scavenger, or a manual scavenging, people doing groups doing manual scavenging, whether you're Sikh, whether you're Hindu, whether you're Christian, whether you're Muslim, you're doing exactly the same thing. You live in the same place, your lifestyle is same, but just because this a label of religion, you don't get those protections, you don't get those affirmative action benefits. So that is the tribal and the Dalits Muslims. The Pasmanda is a huge category, and in the constitutional terms, they are called OBCs, other backward castes, and that is the other backward caste is the term used by the union government and state government levels. The provinces use the terms backward caste or backward classes, and there is many stratification that in many states you have like BC1, so backward class is 1, backward class is 2. So depending upon your deprivation, depending upon your relative marginalization, you do get benefits. So, and then of course, within that, it's a huge range. There are castes within the Shudra Muslims who have had more education early on, so they have gotten more benefit of these affirmative action policies. Whereas the many castes within them, who were historically not as bad as Dalit Muslims or tribal Muslims, but at the rear end of the education and economic spectrum, they have not been able to use the affirmative action policies as much. So there is the thing. But again, this is the Shudra Muslims or OBC Muslims who are at the forefront of it because they have some sort of social capital, the little bit of financial capital and educational capital to do it. And they are the people who are suffering. Like, for example, in India, we have a category of education institutions called minority education institutions. So an institution can be designated as a minority institution, even if it's funded by the government. It gets certain privilege in terms of its own representation. The case in point, very prominent in India, is Aligarh Muslim University. So Aligarh Muslim University is designated as a minority institution run by Muslims, or run for the Muslims, you can say. So the stipulation is that half the seats in that university will be reserved for that minority group. Now, Aligarh Muslim University is a huge institution, and it has a very important and significantly very important historically, looking at Pakistan movement and providing the ideological intellectual basis for Pakistan movement and fueling that all movement and stuff. So the problem is that when you say 50% of the seats are reserved for Muslims, within that, there is no stratification. And since it's a minority institution, nobody, the central government does not interfere in that. So the rest of the 50%, you can get affirmative action policies, everything applied. But the 50% which is applied for Muslims or reserved for Muslims, you don't get any affirmative action. So, and then these Pasmanda Muslims lose out a lot, because that all that is captured by the Ashraf, the upper caste elite Muslims. So there is a different kind of discriminations people are facing. Like Dalit Muslims who are getting, say, for example, they die while cleaning gutters, like the Hela community or the Dome community. But since they're not classified as scheduled caste, just because they're designated Muslims, they don't get any protections. They don't get compensation in that way and stuff. So I would say that the different groups within Pasmanda Muslims face different kind of discrimination.
Yeah, very informative answer. Thank you. Moving to another one, the important one. A petition for Dalit Christian and Dalit Muslim to be recognized under the scheduled caste category is pending before the Supreme Court. While some of the Dalit groups oppose the inclusion of Dalit Muslims and Dalit Christians in the scheduled castes list. What is the argument on both the sides? What is your take on this issue?
So I think I have already referred to it a little bit in terms of caste being a social institution and not being a religious institution. Okay. And once you consider caste being a social institution, then it's very common sense that people who are facing deprivations, people who are facing disadvantages on account of caste within the society should be given those protections. Now, from that logic, Dalit Muslims and Dalit Christians should get all the protections. You cannot deny that, but life is not so simple. And there are many pushes and pulls, and there are competing powers, and and it's political, basically. Politics is power play. So we need to also look at how it is being perceived. So some of it is very problematic and very fundamentally problematic, because the Constitution of India defines Hindus, or rather Indic religions, in a negative way. So in Constitution of India, there is no positive definition of who is a Hindu. In Article 25B of Constitution of India, and also the later acts like Hindu Marriage Act and Inheritance Act and Adoption Act and stuff, it is very clear that anybody who lives within the boundaries of the modern boundaries of India post 1947, and is not a Muslim, is not a Christian, is not a Jew, is not a Parsi, will be considered a Hindu, which includes Sikhs, Jains, Buddhists, and so-called Indic religions. They call them Indic religions. I mean, it's problematic. The Sikhs have been protesting against it for a very long time, and Jains have kind of gotten a minority status later on that no, we are not Hindus and stuff. And we have folks south in Karnataka, in the southern state of Karnataka. So they have been talking about it. So now that is a very fundamental problem, which I think which needs to be unpacked and looked at it. Uh, and actually, Government of India has formed a committee in October of last year under former Chief Justice of India, KG Balakrishnan. Sorry, not a committee, a commission, three-member commission to look into this demand. It's a long pending demand, and hopefully they will give their recommendation soon, so we'll know about it. As far as the opposition to this is concerned by many Dalit groups, I think it is totally misplaced and based on a misunderstanding. So we have a different states, and the union government has a formula based on which affirmative action policies are formed, which is primarily roughly based on the population, which is truer about Dalit population and tribal population, but way off for OBC population. Like OBC population is India is anywhere between 50 to 60%, whereas very few places have more than 27% reservation for OBCs. But there was a concrete formula, okay, that this is the number of people, these are the number of Dalits, this is the number of tribals, so this much representation should be given to them. What the understanding of these people is that somehow everybody will be clubbed into the same number, same category by having the same size of the pie. The right approach is that we need to have a proper caste census. That we need to know the last caste census in this country, or in India, was done in 1931. That is like 92 years ago. And everything else and is based on caste, but we don't know the right numbers. And all sorts of policies are coming and everything is being formulated. So I think all progressive forces, all forces of social justice should come together and first press for a proper caste census, that we know, socioeconomic caste census, that we know which group has what population and what is their level of deprivation, and on which we decided. So it doesn't have to be that SC quota is only 15%. I mean, if it's found out that Muslims are like, so for example, if you have the same formula, so like roughly 15% of Muslims, 15% of Indian population is considered Muslims. And if you have the same formula which we for other groups, so 15% within them is Dalit. So overall 15% of 15% is about 2.25%. So the ideal formula would be that we increase the SC quota from 15 to 17.5%. And then you can include Christian population, a minuscule population in India. It's not even 2%. And like even if you count like 15% of that, it comes to like 0.3%. You can add that too, and you can overall make like 18%. So you'll go from 15 to 18%, and it will include all the new people. And now, because of this new category of economically weaker section for upper castes, which the Modi government has brought, and which is total contravention of the principles of affirmative action, but that's a different debate, has brought, but then the Supreme Court has upheld it, and that means the upper limit of reservation is gone now. So now it's up to the groups of social justice, the people and groups fighting for it, to push for it and make it a reality. So I think that kind of resistance is misplaced and based on a misunderstanding. But there is also some fundamental issues within the Indian Constitution which we need to also look at.
Yeah, very well defined answer. Thank you so much. So has the government taken any affirmative action for the Dalit Muslims so far? What are the affirmative action government should take further?
I would say that so India is kind of not really as decentralized as US, but states have some autonomy. in terms of having policy. I mean, the states mostly in India are provinces. They have to follow the union government. I mean, which is more like a central government now, supposed to be constitutional
Yes.
union government, but it is very centralized. So the central government forms the policy, and the state governments implement it. In most cases, there is a state list, but that is very sort of disempowered list, I would say. But so they have different policies. Some states in the south have done something for Dalit Muslims in terms of protection and stuff. But as far as the central government is concerned, uh, despite very long-standing demands, there has not been done much. This new commission, the KG Balakrishnan Commission, I think is a very significant step, and I hope the government is serious about it to start looking into. I think the first step would be to look into the level of deprivation. That if there is a Muslim manual scavenger, is he or she is any different than a Hindu manual scavenger in their lifestyle, in their living standard, what they do, how they're perceived by others. Like we have data and anecdotal evidence that Muslim Dalits are discriminated by other Muslims, from workplace to even places of worship. Okay, so this is the I think one major step which the government has taken. We don't know what their real intent is because everybody is tries to place everything to their advantage. But on the face of it, I think it's a step in the right direction, and hopefully we will get to a place where you can decide better on this.
Yes, I agreed with you. Thank you. So the next question is, do you think that the conversation around the caste discrimination and daily experiences of caste do not taken seriously with the Muslim community? What are the problems in initiating the conversation, and how much is the lack of the data and studies a challenge?
Uh, so this is one area which is kind of differentiates the kind of discrimination or caste differences in Brahminical tradition and in Islamic tradition. So because Brahminical tradition, you actually have texts, so it's very textual, which legitimizes. And actually, if you look at Manusmriti, it is one of the major smritis, which actually has very detailed descriptions and directions that if the same crime is committed by a Brahmin, he should be let go or should be very lightly punished. For Kshatriya, this should be done, and Vaishya, this should be done. But if the Shudra is to be like totally, and they don't even consider Dalits what we call, because they consider untouchable. So they were like even out of that realm. Same, you can go back to Purush Sukta, even further in Rig Veda, then the whole idea that Brahmins were born out of mouth, and the Kshatriyas from the arms, and the Vaishyas, the merchant classes from the stomachs and the thighs, and then finally the Shudras who are from the feet, or Gita for that matter. Like Gita again codifies it that Shudra is not supposed to have any property. Shudra's only duty in life to serve the Dvij, or the twice born. Now coming to Islam, if you look at the text, the fundamental, the foundational text, the Quran and many hadiths, you don't find this kind of clarity in terms of stratification, though people have later on written, especially in South Asia, many texts like kind of analyzing and exegising further, and have tried to brought in that people who came from Arabia are like superior and stuff like that. But also there is no direct mention of caste. But the thing is, caste is a social institution. If the society is the soil, okay, you can bring a seed and you plant in the soil, but and the seed will kind of flower and turn into a plant, but the soil will have a lot of impact on that. So that has happened with all these, whether it's Christianity or Islam. There are almost parallels. I mean, talking from like a different minority community like Christians. So Christians, if you go, especially Christian population is small, but and mostly concentrated in south and the tribal belts north. So for example, there is a community called Nadars. So Nadars are basically a Shudra community, and they have become pretty wealthy with some business enterprise and farming in the past few decades. So there are Hindu Nadars and there are Christian Nadars and there are other Christians, lower caste and everything. There are a lot more marriages between Hindu Nadars and Christian Nadars than between Christian Nadars and other Christians, other Christian lower caste and or other caste. So, we don't have that kind of data. We have data on that.
Yes.
We don't have that kind of data on Muslims. But the point being that there's a lot more sort of same caste level interaction across different religions than within the same caste in the same religion. And uh, that's true about Muslims as well. I mean, if you look at matrimonial pages of Urdu newspapers, in so there are Urdu newspapers in UP, in Andhra Pradesh, in Bihar, where there are significant Urdu speaking people, also in a couple of other states in the south. And you just need to look at it, that it's very specific that who we will be marrying. And you will hear from Hela community that even if under a lot of inducement and stuff, they became Muslims, and they are invited, even if they're invited to the weddings at some other caste people, higher caste people, they will be sat separately to eat. They will be seated separately to eat. And of course, the graveyards are different. They're separate. The many cases, the mosques are different, separate. And that's the lived reality of Dalit Muslims, if you can call them Dalits. Yeah.
Yeah, so true. So, given that the caste system is defined by a set of the religion beliefs that have endured for millennia, do you need to change those beliefs before you can stop discrimination? Or is the religious component just a smoke screen to allow one group of people to oppress other?
If that would be the case solely, then there won't be any casteism within Muslims, or among Christians for that matter, or among Buddhists. So it's very interestingly, like even Buddhism, the people who have converted to Buddhism in India, and I guess elsewhere as well, there is caste is practiced in, if not in food, but definitely in marriages and other social alliances. So if that would be true, that this won't be happening. So we need to also see that what is the context of all this, like where all this is happening. So the social stratification, social stratification is common, has been common since, I would say, taking a lot of liberties here, since agriculture started like 10,000, 12,000 years ago. Some people have better land and stuff like that. And then we have the whole feudalism, and then capitalism and stuff like that. So, but that since the foundation is stratified, so many societies have many sorts of stratification, like race. Even though race is very new, 400 years ago there was no conception of race. The race is created, okay, and then they started looking for justification for race in Bible, going back that, oh, this is what, like, slaves obey your masters. Okay, so they've tried to justify this stratification between slave and slave masters and stuff like that. Now, if you start looking at the Old Testament has thousand things. Old Testament, there is incest in Old Testament. There is all sorts of crazy stuff going on. Women have no rights if you start going by living by Old Testament. So, so those were written for a certain time. But once you start building your society with a very specific kind of worldview or very specific objective, that this is what you do, then you start looking for justification. Same thing is here. Same thing in India, same thing, I would say, in Pakistan, that when the ruling elite kind of decides, or the ruling group decides, it could be a community that decides that we have to justify this. So then they start looking for stuff. Okay, how can we justify this? And then they go back all everywhere, and even if there's something not there, they create out of thin air that, oh, this should be the way it is. So I don't know, if you start really going by religious scripture, like for example, even Bible, like when is even today Bible is not finalized. Okay, there are hundreds and uh, hundreds of different denominations. Same with like a Quran. I would say like many different sects we have, very different factions we have. They have their own Quran, and there is significant differences within them. I mean, even the Sunni Quran, which we use mostly, it was like finalized earlier last century. I mean, it's not even then. It's not kind of, so you can call it final, you know. So this is kind of, we need to again, going back, a religious institution or social institution and society is very messy. Because it is made up of people, okay, and people have their own kind of mind, and that kind of things happen. I mean, the very famous and people have emotions. I mean, the very famous Feynman quote that physics would be so much more difficult if electrons had emotions.
Yes.
Like it would be crazy. You can't do anything because everybody has emotions and everybody do things. And society is kind of a conglomeration of people, and people, where there is people, there is power play, there is politics, and I think all this plays into it. So I don't think we need to really go back to scripture. I mean, we should use the scriptures to sort of puncture their arguments, and kind of destroy their myths and destroy their sort of the image they create. But I don't think going back then ahead, because it's very contextual.
Yeah, very insightful. So the last question is, the protection level for underprivileged minorities and castes appears to be declining in South Asia every year. Are the graphs for the massive violence, social justice, community development, and caste and religious identity improving or declining?
Uh, Definitely, it is declining, and atrocities. I mean, okay, I'll first take up the first part in terms of the protections declining. So it has been in a very clever way. So rather than, for example, affirmative action, say in India, for example, I know best about India, is so we had three levels of affirmative action. One level was political affirmative action. So you get, which came out of the Pune Pact, 1932, and was codified in the Government of India Act 1935, and which actually is the foundation of Indian Constitution. Like more than, I would say, two-thirds of Indian Constitution is basically Government of India Act 1935. So the scheduled caste category comes from there. So that is that is one. The second thing is, and then of course after independence, this new category of OBC came, and ST and SC category were there, and the OBC category came. So first they tried to lower the numbers that are, and not implementing. Like for example, you go to many institutions, there will these posts and seats reserved for disadvantaged caste and groups will not be filled. So for years they will remain unfilled, and finally they will be merged into so-called general, in what we call the euphemism for the upper caste in India is the category called general category, which is a euphemism. The upper caste category. So they will emerge and they will take advantage of that, and it will come. So now, and but then in 60s and 70s, with the rise of forces of social justice, and when these Bahujan groups, the Bahujan Pasmanda groups became stronger, they got some education, they had voice, and they started fighting for those positions. Then they turned to privatization. So I mean, we talk a lot about this liberalization project in India, and started in 80s and 90s, was because of economic realities and stuff. I mean, that is more like a smoke screen. It was primarily done to take away state resources away, take the state resources away from these emerging powers of so far downtrodden disadvantaged caste. So as long as the upper caste were utilizing public sector undertakings and public universities and all the facilities at the state exchequer expense, it was all fine. But when these disadvantaged groups got into a position where they can take advantage of these opportunities, it was taken away from them and being placed in private sector. So, and in the private sector, there is no affirmative action in India. So and even if they get like subsidized land, if they get all sorts of tax subsidies and everything, there is no affirmative action. And we have data that in private sector, it's almost totally dominated by upper caste, whether from the board members to the managerial to the executive. Same in the educational institutions. It's totally dominated by upper caste, and it's very expensive. And of course, the disadvantaged caste don't have that kind of financial capital to access that. So they will say, "Oh, it's all open. You pay the fee and you can study." But the problem is that the fee is so high in private institutions that the most people in India can't afford it. So they have kind of switched strategies, and that's how they have come down. Uh, the second part, in terms of physical violence, very interesting. I come from Bihar, which has been a hotbed of violence in the 60s, in the 70s and 80s and 90s.
Yes.
So very interesting. A lot of people have analyzed it, and they said that why there was no caste violence in the 50s and 60s. Very little, because the thing was the people who were oppressed had no power, no consciousness. So like uh, there's a caste in Bihar called Bhumihars. I mean, they're kind of a in between caste, not really Brahmins, but kind of try to act like Brahmins who farm and stuff like that. And so one like Bhumihar kid will go to a Dalit village and will do anything he wants. I mean, even if there are like 500 people in the village, this one Bhumihar 16, 17-year old kid with a danda, with a stick, and can do anything and nobody will say anything. Once this consciousness came up, then people started resisting. Then the upper caste think that we need to do something big. And then these chain of these massacres started, that we need to really put down with force. Now just symbolically oppression is not enough to keep them down. So only when you kind of start the group, the oppressed group starts resisting. Like, for example, a very unfortunate example we see in cases of domestic violence as well. Like we have across South Asia and many other countries. So we have cases of domestic violence, and we always hear from older women that why do you resist? The more you resist, the more you will get, I mean, to the women, of course, that the more you resist, the more you will get beaten up. So both appar khalo, you get like a couple of slaps and he will be happy, and then you can go back to. If you start, you yell back, you hit back, then he will punch you and your teeth will be broken and you'll be bruised. Don't do that. So it's very unfortunate example, but it's very apt in this case. So earlier, when these oppressed groups used to take it lying down, so there was no large scale violence required. Once they started resisting, then these large scale bouts, like the whole village was massacred. Women, men, kids, even in some cases cattle, like total. I mean, they have so many, and that stopped when the Dalits organized and they formed their own units and started fighting back and attacking. Then they realized that, okay, this is not going to go up. Then they started taking help of state institutions and stuff, but at least that kind of violence is stopped. So I think, and now it has moved into a different phase. It's now in a more softer mode. So they can bring them into this Brahminical umbrella. That, okay, we are all the same. And othering the Muslims and the Christians. I mean, going back to the same argument that we are all the same, but except for Muslims and Christian and Jews and Parsis. But Jews and Parsis are not even like 1%, 0.5% of Indian population. They don't matter. So othering of Muslim and Christians, and bringing everybody in within this Brahminical umbrella, and then we are all fine, we're a family, and within family we can do anything we want. There could be cases of domestic violence, there will be like child sexual abuse, whatever, but it's all within the family, so you don't worry about it. It's all in one family, but these other people, they need to be kept away. So that is the kind of project going on right now. So not so much overt violence, but very covert violence, oppression, taking away your rights, taking away your economic opportunities, your kids not having a good future, sort of. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. I must say it has been pleasure to listening you. Thank you so much for your insightful views. We appreciate your participation and looking forward to see you again in future, inshallah. Until next time, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. Very insightful questions, and I really enjoyed talking to you. Thank you.
Same here. Thank you. Stay safe. Bye. Take care.
Take care.